He was 51. She was 23. And when Gary Cooper looked at Grace Kelly on the set of High Noon, he knew he was making a terrible mistake, but he couldn't stop himself. It was 1952, and Grace Kelly was nobody. A contract player at MGM, beautiful but unknown, cast in a small role opposite Hollywood's most famous leading man. Gary Cooper was an icon. Tall, handsome, the strong silent type that defined American masculinity. He'd won an Oscar. He'd conquered Hollywood. He was married to a socialite named Rocky. He was Catholic. He believed in the sanctity of marriage. And then Grace walked onto the set. She wore a simple Quaker dress for her role as Amy Fowler Kane, the pacifist wife who begs her martial husband not to fight. But beneath that modest costume was a young woman unlike anyone Cooper had ever met. She moved with a dancer's grace. She spoke with a finishing school elegance that made grown men lean closer to hear. She had ice blonde hair and eyes the color of the Pacific on a winter morning. Cool, distant, untouchable. Gary Cooper was doomed. What nobody on that set knew, not the director, not the crew, not even Grace herself at first, was that this movie would destroy them both. Not the film itself, which would become a classic, but what happened between scenes. In the shadows. In hotel rooms where the blinds were drawn and the phones were off the hook. Where a 51-year-old married man held a 23-year-old girl and whispered the words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I love you, Grace. God help me. I love you. The affair that followed would last 18 months. It would be conducted in absolute secrecy, hidden from gossip columnists, concealed from studio executives, buried beneath layers of Catholic guilt and Philadelphia propriety. But it would mark Grace Kelly forever. It would teach her that love and pain were inseparable, that wanting something desperately didn't mean you could have it, that some men, no matter how much they loved you, would never leave their wives. And when it ended, when Gary Cooper finally walked away because his conscience wouldn't let him stay, Grace Kelly learned the lesson that would define her entire life. Happiness was something that happened to other people. To understand why Grace Kelly fell so hard for Gary Cooper, you have to go back to the beginning. To Philadelphia, to a cold brick mansion where a young girl grew up desperate for her father's approval and never received it. Jack Kelly was an Olympic rowing champion and a self-made millionaire. He'd built an empire from nothing, and he expected his children to be champions too. Grace's older sister Peggy was a champion swimmer. Her brother Kel Jr. was a rower like their father. But Grace was soft, artistic. She wanted to be an actress, which Jack Kelly considered only slightly more respectable than prostitution. You'll never amount to anything, he told her. Grace spent her entire childhood trying to prove him wrong. She studied acting. She moved to New York at 18 to attend the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. She modeled to pay her bills, her perfect bone structure earning her $60 a day in an era when most secretaries made $30 a week. She did live television. She got small parts on Broadway. And in 1951, at age 22, MGM offered her a contract. Her father didn't come to the train station when she left for Hollywood. So when Gary Cooper, America's most beloved leading man, winner of the Academy Award, star of films like Sergeant York and For Whom the Bell Bells, when he looked at Grace Kelly with genuine admiration, it was the first time in her life that a man she respected had actually seen her. And she fell completely apart. The set of High Noon was a modest affair. A western town built on the Columbia Ranch in Burbank, all false fronts and dusty streets under the relentless California sun. The film was shot in just 31 days, a tight schedule that left little room for romance. But Grace and Gary found the time anyway. It started innocently enough. Cooper was a gentleman, famous for treating his co-stars with respect. He helped Grace with her lines. He gave her advice about camera angles and how to play to the lens. He was patient when she was nervous, kind when she made mistakes. He treated her like a professional, like an equal, like someone worth loving. Grace had never experienced that before. She'd dated, of course. There had been boys in New York, fellow actors, aspiring writers, but no one serious. No one who made her feel the way Gary Cooper did when he looked at her across the set, his blue eyes holding hers for just a moment longer than necessary. The director, Fred Zinnemann, noticed it first. The way Cooper's hand would linger on Grace's shoulder between takes. The way they'd talk quietly in the corners of the set, their heads bent close together, the way Grace's entire face would light up when Cooper entered the room. "Be careful," Zinnemann warned her quietly one afternoon. "Gary's married, and Hollywood doesn't forgive." Grace just smiled. That cool, composed smile that would later earn her the nickname Ice Princess. "I'm always careful," she said. She was lying. 3 weeks into filming, Gary Cooper invited Grace to dinner at Chasen's, the legendary Beverly Hills restaurant where stars went to be seen. It was a dangerous choice. Too public, too visible. But Cooper didn't care. He wanted to be seen with her, wanted the world to know that this beautiful young actress on his arm was someone special. They sat in a red leather booth in the back, candlelight flickering between them. Cooper ordered martinis. Grace had never had a martini before, but she drank it anyway, trying to appear sophisticated. Worldly. 23 going on 35. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Cooper said, and Grace found herself talking, really talking, about her cold father who'd never approved of her, about her competitive sisters who were better at everything, about how acting was the only place she'd ever felt like herself. Cooper listened. Really listened. His eyes never left her face. "You're going to be a star, Grace," he said quietly. "A huge star. Bigger than anyone realizes." "And you?" Grace asked. "What do you want?" Cooper was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at his drink, the ice cubes melting slowly in the amber liquid. "I want things I can't have," he said finally. Grace reached across the table and took his hand. That night everything changed. The affair was conducted with the precision of a military operation. They couldn't be seen together publicly. Cooper was too famous. The scandal too dangerous. So they met in secret. Grace would drive to a small apartment Cooper kept on the west side, parking 2 blocks away and walking the rest of the distance with a scarf over her hair and dark sunglasses hiding her face. Cooper would already be there, waiting. Always waiting. What happened in that apartment was nobody's business but theirs. But those who knew Grace before and after could see the change. She glowed. She moved differently, carried herself with a new confidence. She was a woman in love for the first time in her life, and it showed in everything she did. But there were problems. Terrible problems that Grace tried desperately to ignore. Gary Cooper was Catholic. Divorce was not an option for him. The church forbade it, and he actually believed. He'd made vows to his wife Rocky in front of God and family, and no matter how much he loved Grace, he couldn't break those vows. He was also 28 years older than Grace. At 51, he was closer in age to Grace's father than to Grace herself. In another decade, he'd be collecting Social Security while Grace was still in her 30s. And then there was Rocky. Veronica "Rocky" Cooper was no fool. She knew her husband, she'd been married to him for 20 years and had watched him conduct affairs before. With Patricia Neal, with Ingrid Bergman, with half the leading ladies in Hollywood. She knew the signs. The late nights at the studio. The unexplained absences. The way he'd come home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. But Grace Kelly was different. Rocky could tell. This wasn't just another affair. This was serious. And Rocky Cooper was not the kind of woman who gave up her marriage without a fight. 6 months into the affair, Rocky made her move. She invited Grace to lunch. A friendly lunch, just 2 women getting to know each other. Grace couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion, so she accepted. She wore a simple blue dress and pearls, trying to look young and innocent and unthreatening. Rocky was waiting at the Brown Derby, sitting in a corner booth with a perfect martini and an even more perfect smile. "Grace," she said warmly, "how lovely to see you. Gary's told me so much about you." Grace felt her throat tighten. "Has he?" "Oh, yes. He thinks you're tremendously talented. Says you're going to be a huge star." Grace sat down slowly. The waiter materialized, and she ordered a glass of white wine she didn't want. Rocky leaned forward, her smile never wavering. "I know about the affair, Grace." The restaurant seemed to go very quiet. Grace could hear the blood rushing in her ears. "I don't know what you—" "Please," Rocky interrupted gently, "don't insult either of us. I've been married to Gary for 20 years. I know when he's sleeping with someone." Grace felt her hands start to shake. She clasped them in her lap where Rocky couldn't see. "Here's what's going to happen," Rocky continued, her voice still pleasant, still friendly. "You're going to end it. Tonight. You're going to tell Gary that you can't see him anymore, that you've realized it's a mistake, that you want different things. And then you're going to walk away. And if I don't?" Grace heard herself ask. Rocky's smile finally faltered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Grace to see the steel underneath. "Then I'll divorce him," Rocky said quietly. "I'll name you in the papers. I'll make sure every gossip columnist in Hollywood knows exactly what kind of girl Grace Kelly really is. I'll destroy your career before it even starts." She paused, letting that sink in. "Gary is Catholic, Grace. He won't leave me. He can't. It would kill him. So this affair will continue for a few more months, maybe a year. And then it will end anyway because he'll choose his marriage over you. He always does. But by then, your reputation will be ruined. You'll be known as the home wrecker who seduced America's most beloved actor. Is that really what you want?" Grace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Rocky stood up, placing a $20 bill on the table. "You seem like a nice girl, Grace. Don't waste your life on a man who will never choose you. End it now, while you still can." Then she walked out, leaving Grace alone in the booth with an untouched glass of wine and a shattered heart. That night, Grace drove to Cooper's apartment. She'd called ahead, something she never did, and asked him to meet her. Just for an hour. Just one more time. Cooper was waiting when she arrived. He looked worried. Older, somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper in the lamplight. "Grace, what's wrong?" She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him, she'd lose her nerve. "We have to stop," she said. "This, us, we have to end it." Silence. Long and terrible. "Did Rocky talk to you?" Cooper asked quietly. Grace's head snapped up. "You knew?" "I suspected. She's been different lately. Colder. I think she hired a detective. She threatened to divorce you, to name me in the papers." Cooper closed his eyes. "God, Grace, I'm so sorry." "Is it true?" Grace demanded. "What she said? That you'll never leave her? That you'll choose your marriage over me?" Cooper was quiet for so long that Grace thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." The word hit Grace like a physical blow. "I love you," Cooper continued, and now there were tears in his eyes. Real tears running down the face of America's most stoic leading man. "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But I'm Catholic, Grace. I made vows, before God, and I can't break them, no matter how much I want to." "Then what was this?" Grace asked, and her voice was shaking. "What were we doing for the past 6 months?" "Being selfish," Cooper said. "Being weak. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would hurt you. But I couldn't stop myself, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Grace felt something break inside her. Some fragile thing she'd been protecting, some last piece of innocence she'd carried from Philadelphia to New York to Hollywood. It shattered completely. "I should go," she whispered. "Grace, no, don't, please." She turned toward the door. Cooper caught her arm. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For making you love me when I knew I couldn't stay. For being too weak to do the right thing 6 months ago. You deserved better than this. Better than me." Grace pulled her arm free. She didn't trust herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she'd start crying, and she refused to give him that. Refused to let him see how completely he'd destroyed her. She walked out of that apartment and never went back. High Noon premiered 6 weeks later. It was a massive success, a critical and commercial triumph that would become one of the greatest westerns ever made. Gary Cooper's performance was hailed as career-defining. He would win his 2nd Academy Award for the role. Grace Kelly's performance was barely noticed. She had less than 10 minutes of screen time, and critics dismissed her as decorative and adequate but forgettable. She didn't care. She couldn't watch the movie without remembering. Every scene. Every stolen moment between takes. The way Cooper had looked at her when the cameras weren't rolling. The way she'd believed him when he said he loved her. The affair officially ended in January 1953, but the damage lasted much longer. Grace threw herself into work with manic intensity. She did 3 films that year. Mogambo with Clark Gable and Ava Gardner, Dial M for Murder with Ray Milland, and Rear Window with James Stewart. The last 2 were directed by Alfred Hitchcock, who had become the most important professional relationship of Grace's life. But personally, Grace was adrift. She dated, but nothing serious. She had a brief fling with Clark Gable on the Mogambo set in Africa. Another married man. Another doomed romance. She had a rumoured affair with Ray Milland that nearly became a scandal when Milland's wife threatened to name Grace in a divorce. Grace was developing a pattern. And it wasn't healthy. She only dated married men, older men, men who couldn't fully commit to her. Men who would inevitably choose their wives over Grace, proving what Grace had always suspected deep down. She wasn't worth choosing. Her father had taught her that. Gary Cooper had confirmed it. In 1954, Grace won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Country Girl. She was 25 years old, at the absolute peak of her career, the most beautiful woman in Hollywood. And she'd never felt more alone. She accepted the Oscar in an ice blue Edith head gown that would become iconic. She gave a gracious speech, thanking her director and co-stars, and pointedly not mentioning her father. Backstage, reporters asked her about her love life, about marriage, about settling down. "I don't have time for that," Grace said, smiling that cool, perfect smile. "I have a career to focus on." But late that night, alone in her apartment with the golden statuette sitting on her coffee table, Grace Kelly cried herself to sleep, because she knew the truth. Winning an Oscar wouldn't fill the hole that Gary Cooper had left. Success wouldn't make her father proud. Fame wouldn't make her feel less alone. Nothing would. In May 1955, Grace attended the Cannes Film Festival to promote To Catch a Thief. While there, she agreed to a publicity photo shoot at the Palace of Monaco. It was supposed to be a simple meet and greet with Prince Rainier III, the bachelor ruler of the tiny principality. It was the photo op that would change her life. Prince Rainier was 31, handsome, charming, and absolutely determined to marry a movie star to boost Monaco's international profile. When he met Grace Kelly, cool, elegant, untouchable Grace Kelly, he knew he'd found what he was looking for. 6 months later, he proposed. Grace said yes. Her friends begged her to reconsider. "You barely know him," they protested. "You'll have to give up your career. You'll be trapped in Monaco for the rest of your life." But Grace didn't care. Rainier was offering her something Gary Cooper never could. Marriage, respectability, a title, a role her father might finally approve of. The fact that she didn't love Rainier didn't matter. Grace had learned her lesson with Gary Cooper. Love was dangerous, love was painful, love destroyed you. Better to marry for duty, for position, for anything except love. On April 19, 1956, Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier III of Monaco in what was called the wedding of the century. 30 million people watched on television. Grace wore a gown designed by Helen Rose that required 25 yards of silk and 100 yards of tulle. She looked like a fairy tale princess. But those who knew her best could see the truth. Her smile was perfect. Her posture was flawless. Her happiness was completely fake. Grace Kelly was marrying a man she didn't love to escape the pain of loving a man she couldn't have. And she would spend the next 26 years living with that choice. The marriage was not happy. Rainier was controlling, traditional, and absolutely certain that Grace's acting career was over. When Alfred Hitchcock begged Grace to star in Marnie in 1962, offering her $1 million and the role of a lifetime, Rainier refused to let her do it. "You're the Princess of Monaco now," he told her, "not an actress." Grace never acted again. She had 3 children, Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie, and threw herself into charity work and royal duties. She was elegant, poised, perfect, but she was miserable. Friends who visited her in Monaco reported that Grace drank heavily, that she seemed trapped, that the palace, for all its beauty, felt like a prison. Grace herself never complained publicly. She'd made her choice. She would live with it. Meanwhile, Gary Cooper's life fell apart without her. The guilt of the affair ate at him. His marriage to Rocky became strained, cold, more performance than partnership. He made more films, won more awards, but the joy had gone out of it. In 1960, Gary Cooper was diagnosed with prostate cancer. It had metastasized. The prognosis was terminal. He had months to live. According to friends, Cooper spent his final days thinking about Grace, about the apartment on the West Side, about the young blonde actress who'd loved him completely and whom he'd been too Catholic, too married, too cowardly to choose. He died on May 13, 1961, at the age of 60. When Grace heard the news in Monaco, she locked herself in her bedroom and wept for 3 days. Rainier didn't understand. He thought she was being dramatic, overly emotional. Gary Cooper was just a co-star after all. Just another actor she'd worked with years ago. He had no idea that Gary Cooper was the only man Grace Kelly had ever truly loved. 21 years later, on September 13, 1982, Grace Kelly suffered a stroke while driving on a mountain road in Monaco. Her car went off a cliff. She died the next day at the age of 52. Her daughter Stephanie, who'd been in the passenger seat, survived with minor injuries. But the guilt would haunt Stephanie for the rest of her life. For years, there were rumors that Stephanie had actually been driving, that the royal family had covered it up. The rumors were false, but they damaged Stephanie irreparably. Grace was buried in Monaco in the same cathedral where she'd married Rainier 26 years earlier. Rainier wept at the funeral. He'd loved her, in his way, but he'd never truly understood her. Nobody had. Except maybe Gary Cooper. In the decades since Grace's death, historians and biographers have tried to make sense of her life. The fairy tale princess who gave up Hollywood for a crown. The ice princess who hid a passionate heart. The beautiful woman who never seemed truly happy. But those who study her most closely always come back to the same moment. The same relationship. The same man. Gary Cooper. The 51-year-old married actor who told a 23-year-old girl he loved her and then walked away because he was too Catholic to get divorced. That affair lasted 18 months. It ended in 1953. But Grace Kelly spent the rest of her life, 29 years, living with the consequences. She married a prince. She wore a crown. She had beautiful children and a palace on the Mediterranean. But she never got over Gary Cooper. And in the end, that's the real tragedy of Grace Kelly's life. Not the car accident. Not the unhappy marriage. Not even giving up her career. The tragedy was that she learned at 23 that the men she loved would always choose something else. Their wives. Their faith. Their duty. Never her. Her father had taught her that lesson first. Gary Cooper confirmed it. And Prince Rainier spent 26 years proving it over and over again. Grace Kelly was the most beautiful woman in the world. But she was never beautiful enough to be chosen. And she knew it. That knowledge, that terrible, corrosive knowledge followed her from Hollywood to Monaco, from the red carpets to the palace, from her Oscar triumph to her funeral. She carried it every single day until a stroke on a mountain road finally set her free. Today, when people remember Grace Kelly, they think of elegance, beauty, fairy tales, the Hollywood star who became a princess. But if you look closely at the photographs from her later years, the official royal portraits, the charity events, the family photos, you can see something else. You can see the sadness. It's there in her eyes, in the set of her mouth, in the way she holds herself, perfect posture hiding a broken heart. Grace Kelly got everything she ever wanted. The career, the Oscar, the prince, the palace. Everything except the one thing she actually needed, the love of a man who would choose her. Gary Cooper loved her. She knew that. He told her so 1,000 times in that apartment on the West Side, holding her in the lamplight, whispering promises he could never keep. But he didn't love her enough to leave his wife. And Grace Kelly spent the rest of her life settling for men who didn't love her enough either. That was the real price of the affair. Not the 18 months they spent together, but the 29 years Grace spent afterward, remembering what it felt like to be loved that way. Completely. Desperately. Impossibly. And knowing she'd never feel it again. Gary Cooper was 51 when he told Grace Kelly he loved her. She was 23. The age gap destroyed them both. But Grace carried the scars all the way to her grave.